Hello once again, and welcome to Political Dharma with Alan Zundell. Today is March 2nd, 2024, and on today's show, how independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was received by California Libertarians at their state party convention, updates on Kennedy's ballot access efforts, as well as the court case for Donald Trump being on the ballot in the primaries as well as the general election. And then finally, we'll be looking at what's happening in the major party primaries this week. Last Saturday, RFK spoke at the state convention of the California Libertarian Party, as well as participating in a panel discussion with some candidates for the Libertarian Party's presidential nomination. Here's a short excerpt from Kennedy's speech.
I think one of the reasons that libertarianism appeals to me is the optimism about human nature. In its natal state, human beings have a yearning, deep spiritual yearning, to help people, to be kind, to be compassionate, to sacrifice, to be altruistic. And we all understand just from experience that when we're ordered to do those things, they become stale and they become polluted and tainted. And that the place where those things flourish, where we see them, is in communities. And communities that are not governed with totalitarian controls by above, but are governed by markets, which means free choice. A thing that I learned from my work with the Riverkeeper is that this idea that we have to choose between environmental policy and economic policy is illusory. In 100% of the situations, I would argue, good environmental policy is identical to good economic policy. If we want to measure the economy, and this is how we ought to be measuring it, based upon how it produces jobs and the dignity of jobs over the generation, and how it preserves and safeguards the assets of our community. If, on the other hand, we want to do what the big polluters have been asking us to do, and they're indentured servants in our political process, which is to treat the planet as if it were business in liquidation, convert our natural resources to cash as quickly as possible, have a few years of pollution-based prosperity, we can generate an instantaneous cash flow and the illusion of a prosperous economy, and we can make a few people billionaires by impoverishing the rest of us. But our children are going to pay for our joyride.
The video can be found on the YouTube channel for the California Libertarian Party on the tab for live videos. The speech was nearly an hour long, and I found it to be somewhat rambling and unfocused and not well geared toward a libertarian audience. But what did the libertarians there think? David Weigel reported on the convention in the Semaphore news site. He described audience reaction as, quote, polite, appreciative, and not convinced, end quote. He reported that Kennedy won only a single vote in the straw poll for the party's presidential nominee. A screenshot of the straw poll results was posted on X by Merrill Cornfield. It showed that the highest vote getter was Lars Mapstead with 25 of the 95 votes cast. The Mises Caucus favorite, Michael Rechtenwald, came in second with 21 votes. As I reported last week, the Mises Caucus controls the majority of the delegates to the National Party Convention in May, so their candidate Rechtenwald is likely going to be the nominee, but the California results show that Mapstead might be a contender. In any event, looks like Kennedy is off the table for the Libertarian Party nomination. Last week, I also reported that American Values 2024, the super PAC that's supporting candidates' ballot access efforts and his campaign in general, said that they had gotten enough signatures to put Kennedy on the ballot in 2 more states, Georgia and Arizona. I put Georgia on my list of states where Kennedy is going to be on the ballot, but I held off on Arizona because they had, at that time, they just had slightly more than the required number of signatures, and I felt that some of those might be invalidated, so I wanted to wait until we saw that they got more signatures. But over the course of this week, the signatures the AV24 PAC obtained in Arizona went to over 82,000, almost twice the required 42,303 signatures. So I'm adding Arizona to my list of states where Kennedy is going to be on the ballot. AB 24 is also nearing the required number of signatures in Michigan and South Carolina. So far, I count 5 states where Kennedy's going to be on the ballot for the November election. Those are Utah, New Hampshire, Hawaii, Georgia, and Arizona. Now, states like Georgia, Arizona, and Michigan are particularly important because they're swing states, which means that the vote in the presidential election was so close between the two major party candidates that just a few differences in the votes could swing the state toward one or the other. Most commentators say that Kennedy's presence on the ballot is important in swing states because if he takes more votes from Biden than Trump's, let's say takes more potential votes for Biden or Trump, it could determine the outcome of the election. But I think Kennedy's presence is important for a different reason. Let's look at Arizona. In 2020, Joe Biden received 49.36% of the vote in that state, and Donald Trump received 49.06%. That's a difference of only 0.3 percentage points. So yeah, whether Kennedy attracts more potential votes from Biden or for Trump could swing the election towards one or the other. But it also means that RFK has a good chance of winning the state for himself. In 2024, if Kennedy gets 34% or more of the vote, and the rest of the votes remain equally divided between Biden and Trump, Kennedy will win all of the Electoral College votes in that state. He might be able to win with even fewer votes if minor party candidates and an independent candidate like Cornel West gain a relatively large share of the total vote. Now compare that scenario to a non-swing state like Hawaii. In 2020, Biden received 63.73% of the vote and Trump received 34.27%, which is a much bigger difference. If RFK attracts voters equally from both Biden and Trump, he would need to get at least 43% of the vote to win the state's Electoral College votes. Math tells me that getting 34% of the vote would be easier than getting 43% of the vote. If Kennedy can come in first in just one state and get that state's Electoral College votes, that in itself would be a historic achievement. Over the last century, a non-major party candidate has won Electoral College votes only twice. In 1924, Robert La Follette, a former governor and U.S. senator, won 13 electoral votes as the candidate of the Progressive Party. And in 1968, Alabama Governor George Wallace won 46 electoral votes as the candidate of the American Independent Party. If Kennedy can get on enough ballots that more voters start taking a serious look at him, and they continue in their current dislike for both Joe Biden and Donald Trump, we could see Kennedy's poll numbers rising as we head towards the November general election. Now, if he's getting on more ballots and his poll numbers are rising, even more voters are going to be reassured that voting for Kennedy might make a difference. In that kind of scenario, he might rack up a significant number of Electoral College votes by coming in first in some of the states. Of course, winning the Electoral College vote is much more challenging than simply getting some Electoral College votes. But either way, he could shake up our current dysfunctional two-party system. In my November 4th, 2023 episode, I talked somewhat about this, so you can look at that for more detail. But the general idea is that if he gets Electoral College votes, both parties are going to try to figure out how they can attract those kind of Kennedy voters next time around and maybe make significant changes in how they handle policy or handle their voting strategy or something, or even a new party might arise and displace one of the two major parties currently. So take a look at my November 4th episode. Meanwhile, Kennedy's campaign for ballot access continues to face obstacles. Kansas is the latest state to come up with something to hinder his efforts. And here's part of a news segment from the NRD website of Epoch Times explaining that.
It could be more difficult for independent candidates to get on the Kansas ballot this year. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is threatening to sue the state over HB 2516. It's a bill that would raise signature requirements by 4 times. I spoke with Jeff Louderback, a reporter with the Epoch Times, for insight.
Well, in Kansas right now, an independent candidate for any statewide office, and that includes federal office, needs 5,000 signatures to get on the ballot. What the Kansas House has passed, and now it's off to the Kansas Senate. And then if it passes the Kansas Senate, it would need to be signed by their Democrat governor. But if all that happens, 21,000 votes, or 21,000 signatures would be required to get on the ballot for an independent. And that's obviously a lot more of an effort than 5,000.
What's the reason Kansas chooses to increase the number of signatures needed?
Well, the speculation is Kansas is considered a red state, but Laura Kelly is a Democrat governor, and the last two elections that she's won, an independent has impacted the race. An independent and third-party candidates have impacted the race in the view of Republicans who lost. So it's all about politics, and that's the reason they speculate. Pundits are speculating that's why they want this bill to go through. Whether Governor Kelly would sign it and whether they'd have the votes to override her veto if that happens remains to be seen.
The bill, which the Kansas State House of Representatives passed a little over a week ago, also removes the option of paying a filing fee instead of gathering all those signatures to get on the ballot. According to Lauterbach's article on the NRD site, the Kennedy campaign put out a statement saying, quote, "These are the kinds of dirty politics that has Robert F. Kennedy Jr. running for office in the first place. If this stands, our campaign will be forced once again, like we did in Utah, to bring legal action," end quote. Kennedy previously brought a lawsuit against Maine and got it to move its unrealistically early filing date a little later. And as I reported 2 weeks ago, he also filed suit against Idaho for a similar reason, trying to get them to move its March 15th deadline for filing petition signatures. And he also wants them to eliminate the provision that he has to name a vice presidential candidate before he can apply for ballot status, a provision that holds in a number of other states as well. So if he wins in Idaho, he's going to have an easier path towards getting on the ballot in other states. And then he's also filed suit against the state of Maine. Ballot Access News reports that a judge began hearing arguments in that case on Tuesday. The Maine Secretary of State had revoked permission for RFK petitioners to gather signatures at voting sites during its March 5th presidential primary. The Kennedy campaign argues that other candidates are being permitted to gather signatures and that the state has a long tradition of allowing this. The Secretary of State responded that presidential candidates cannot be allowed to petition during a primary election for presidential candidates because their conversations with voters might influence voting decisions in the primary. Center Square, a news site for state and local news, quotes Kennedy lawyers describing Maine Secretary of State Shenna Bellows as, quote, out of control, end quote, and call her a, quote, Democratic partisan hack, end quote, who is disinterested in the rule of law. Last December, Bellows was in the news for a different ballot access decision. In response to citizens who challenged Donald Trump's right to be on the state's primary ballot, Bellows determined that Trump should be barred from the ballot based on the insurrection clause of the U.S. Constitution. That decision is on hold until the U.S. Supreme Court renders a judgment on a similar case from Colorado. Meanwhile, this Wednesday, a state judge in Illinois also determined that Trump was disqualified due to the insurrection clause. He ordered that either the State Board of Elections remove Trump's name from the ballot or that votes for him not be counted. That decision is also on hold until the Colorado case is decided. So when will the Supreme Court make its decision in the Colorado case? Colorado and Maine are holding its primary elections this coming Tuesday, Super Tuesday, March 5th, along with a number of other states. That's just 3 days from now. And Illinois is not far behind on March 19th. Plus, a bunch of other states also are entertaining challenges to Trump being on the ballot and waiting for the Supreme Court to make its decision. Now, since at this late date, with all these states voting in primary elections this coming week, if the Supreme Court were to make a decision removing Trump from the ballot, it would be a huge mess. So I infer that the court is leaning against removing him from the ballot and so does not feel any pressure to be in a hurry to make a decision. And with Trump on the primary ballots so far, he's winning big. South Carolina held its Republican presidential primary last Saturday, and on Tuesday in Michigan, both the Democratic and Republican parties held primaries. As expected, Donald Trump and Joe Biden came in first by a large margin. In South Carolina, Trump received about 60% of the vote, and Nikki Haley received about 40%. As South Carolina is Haley's home state where she was once governor, this is a pretty poor showing for her. In Michigan, Trump won about 68% of the vote, with Haley getting about 27%, again losing by a double-digit margin. The graphics you see on the video version of this podcast are from Ballotpedia. Meanwhile, in Michigan, Biden received about 81% of the vote, with Marianne Williamson getting 3% and Dean Phillips 2.7%. The graphic is from NBC News. The big story here was that votes for uncommitted came in at over 13%, winning second place after Biden. That's over 100,000 votes for uncommitted, about 5 times more than it typically gets in a presidential election. Opponents of Biden's policy towards Israel had mounted a campaign to have people vote uncommitted as a show of protest. The high number of votes that went to uncommitted might influence Biden's Israel policy. I would expect if it does to a very minor degree, it will, but it's not going to stop him from winning the nomination of the Democratic Party. On a side note, after the Michigan results came in, Marianne Williamson decided to unsuspend her campaign for the Democratic nomination. Here's an edited version of the video announcement she made on X.
As of today, I am unsuspending my campaign for the presidency of the United States. I had suspended it because I was losing the horse race, but something so much more important than the horse race is at stake here, and we must respond. Right now, we have a fascist standing at the door. Everybody's all upset about it. Well, we should be upset about it, but we're not going to defeat the fascist by what? What is President Biden offering? He says, let's finish the job. Well, I hope you realize we're talking about millions of voters for whom they can't even survive unless they work at 2 or 3 jobs. We need to take this country in a direction of hope and possibility and regeneration. That is the vision that will defeat Donald Trump. Not, let us finish the job. We're watching a car crash in slow motion here. Everybody knows it. We're still in this. Let's do this.
She never really clearly said why she changed her mind in that video. As far as I can see, everything she talked about was the same before she suspended her campaign as it is now. So my best guess is that when she saw the high number of votes for uncommitted, she felt like a anti-Biden movement was brewing within the Democratic primary voters, and maybe she could capitalize on that. That, plus the fact that she came in before Dean Phillips, ahead of Dean Phillips, in 2 of the 3 contests where both of their names were on the ballot. I don't really know what's going on through her mind. Looking forward, there are Republican caucuses today in Idaho and Missouri, and Republican primaries in the District of Columbia and North Dakota over the next couple of days. And then comes Super Tuesday, when 16 states plus American Samoa hold contests, as you can see in this list from Politico. Hawaii holds its Democratic caucus on Wednesday after that. Unless Nikki Haley, Marianne Williamson, or Dean Phillips wins somewhere over the next 5 days, the race for the major party nominations is pretty much over. The only way that I can see that Trump and Biden aren't going to be the nominees of the major parties is if one or both of them has a serious health event, or maybe Joe Biden's wife, Jill, persuades him that it's time for him to step aside and retire. Absent that, it looks like we're going to be stuck with the 2 widely disliked candidates, which is opening more space than usual for independent candidates like Kennedy and Cornel West, as well as minor party candidates. And that's why you have me here to cover those other candidates, because I think they're going to be important in this election year. Also, I think they're important for highlighting stuff that's wrong with our supposed democratic system of electing people. So if you like this show, please give it a like, a thumbs up. And if you really like the show, subscribe to it and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future episodes. I usually drop them on Saturdays. And finally, if you really, really like the show, you can donate something to help support the show. If you click on the secure link at the end of the program description, just under the video or next to the podcast that you're listening to, whatever case it is. You can also find this show in video version on YouTube and Rumble, and in audio form on streaming platforms, a number of them, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. That's it for this week. Thanks once again for listening, and hope you come back next week, and we'll see what kind of exciting things come in the future. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye.
With ease, I see the chains are breaking. We gained our focus, the moves we're making will prove to determine our self-worth as a passenger on this vehicle Earth.